Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ceres Podcast. I'm Stelios and this is episode 225. Today, I'm once again joined by the brilliant Kate Nicholls, OBE, Chair of UKHospitality. If you work in hospitality, you've definitely been feeling the pressure. Rising costs, employment reforms, NICs, wages, business rates if you're a restaurant or a club or whatever. VAT obviously, and Kate has been at the heart of these hard conversations. She leads the charge for over 150,000 venues across the UK, and under her watch, UKHospitality has become the key voice at the table with government, media and industry leaders. This is Kate's 5th time on the Ceres Podcast, and Alan's been on once, and while I joke that she never prepares, the truth is she's always prepared and always ready because she lives and breathes hospitality. And every time she's been on and every interview I've seen her on, she brings clarity, data and action when it matters most. If you've read the Ceres blog or you follow the news, you'll have seen Kate's insights almost everywhere where it affects hospitality, because when legislation hits or a policy shifts, her team is one of the first to respond. And thanks to many of you tuning in, I've seen more fish and chip shops and more independents that I'm connected with becoming UKHospitality members. And that collective voice matters. The more who join, the stronger the UKHospitality sector becomes. Today's episode is brought to you by Ceres Heavy Duty Cleaning Products. Our newest addition is the Ceres Heavy Duty Descaler, and it obliterates limescale really fast. It's absolutely safe on stainless steel and delicate parts like seals and so on. It's odourless. It's a bit sharp, but it's odourless. It's plant-based, antimicrobial, no fumes, no mess. Grab yours today at ceres.shop. Free next day UK mainland delivery, and we also ship to Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, all the UK islands, so you can get it anywhere. Whilst you're there, check out our free Ceres calculators. Just punch in your costs, get instant menu prices, portion sizes and margins. No spreadsheets, no guesswork. Sign up to our weekly email in the show notes for more tools, offers, competitions and insights. Now, let's dive in to today's conversation with Kate Nicholls. Kate, welcome back to the Ceres Podcast.
Thank you for having me back again. Great to be chatting.
You are definitely a regular now, aren't you?
I think I qualify, yeah.
Well, I just think it's good because when I emailed you and your team, there wasn't a campaign at the time. There was nothing going on. And I thought, you know what, it'd be good just to have a touch base type of conversation.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, you started ramping up with a new campaign. So, yeah, well, I guess it's never a dull moment over there, I guess.
No, it's never quiet. That's right. But also, we really felt that we had to bring forward our budget campaign. So we always do a big campaign in the run up to the budget. But just really the pressure that businesses were under, we felt needed to be articulated, and we needed to be able to get that message out there. And also, I think what made us bring it forward in particular was there started to be talks about more tax increases, that the government had another black hole that they needed to fill, that we were going to have a summer of speculation about tax increases. Wasn't necessarily in the eating and drinking out space. There was a lot of talk of tourism taxes, hotel taxes, bedroom taxes, packaging taxes, coffee cup taxes. But we just got this sense that this budget was going to be tougher again than we perhaps had thought. And we wanted to get a real message out there as early as possible that the sector couldn't take any more. We were taxed out, and that if they were looking at quick fixes, easy solutions, ways to go, We didn't want them going into the summer thinking that there was any more slack to take out of the hospitality industry. So we brought forward the budget campaign and started it earlier than we might otherwise have done.
When would you usually start something like that?
Well, we would start doing work with politicians over the summer behind the scenes and all of that kind of stuff. But actually working with operators to get them involved and engaged, we would start that in September.
How hard is that? Like, because I know we've tried to get operators involved and we've done campaigns, written letters for people. And I think we gave it a real good push over COVID. And I think I was lucky if we got 100 downloads of that letter. And that probably isn't 100 letters sent either, because some people would look at it and think, oh, can I be bothered? And I get that sentiment. And I see the other sentiment, which is why bother? Because MPs don't listen. I don't know how true that is. They may listen, they may not agree. But how hard is it to sort of motivate, people in restaurants and hotels and in the industry to actually get in touch with their MPs?
I think there is that sense of fatigue at the moment because we've been in a crisis situation, pushing so hard for so long, probably for the last 5-6 years. People forget that the MPs have changed.
Mm-hmm.
We had 400 odd new MPs coming into Parliament in the last year. They've been heads down. They haven't necessarily woken up to the issues and the challenges. So although you might have written to your MP during COVID, they might be an entirely different MP now. And I do think people, you do get that sentiment back. Why should I be doing it? I've written to them 4 times already. I'm not getting anything new. But it's just that relentless pressure. So my job, and it's great to come on podcasts like this to be able to make that point. You've got to keep that pressure on. It's like marketing. Basically, what we're doing is marketing the sector to MPs and to ministers. You've got to tell the same story 10, 15, 20 times before anybody gets the message. And you've got to keep that consistent going through so that people do understand what the pressure is and why it's an issue of concern. So it's always difficult. That's also why we started it early. Have to say, being overwhelmed by the response we've had on social media, people getting behind the hashtags taxed out, people feeling that it resonated, saying that they were going to write to their MP. So we have had a good reaction this time round. I think what we now need to do is take it beyond the business owners to the employees and to the customers.
Yeah, well, I think, especially if you're talking about that, like, and if we're using that as an example, I think that many operators, whether they don't want to accept it or do accept it, I think it is a consumer tax, and we do need consumers to understand that it exists, or at least to feel offended by it. Because if they don't care about it, the government's always going to say, "Why do you care? This is a consumer tax." I think the government's always going to have that wall there. So I do think, to some degree, you need to mobilise consumers, especially if you're going to tackle that. In my opinion,
yes, yeah, I think you're right, and I think consumers need to understand why the prices are going up, because it is still a wallet shock. Whether you're going supermarket shopping, you're going out for a meal, you're going out to pick up some food and takeaway, there is still a wallet shock that consumers have as to, oh my goodness, that's a lot more expensive than I thought. And we need to explain why that's the case. And it's not just about the cost to the business. When we've been talking, and when I've been talking on the media about the NIC change and the national living wage change, I've stopped talking necessarily about the impact on the business. Yes, it's there, but actually it's about the impact on all of us as consumers because of the prices, the inflation, what that does to Bank of England interest rates. We've got to make it real to people. And you're right, VAT is a consumer tax. And as far as the government is concerned, they have a very naive view. When you talk to most politicians, they will say, well, you're a business, you can claim it back. And of course, that fails to take account of the fact that we buy it in 0 rated, we're charging it. And so you're always a tax collector for the government. But we need to make that impactful as to what it means as consumers going out.
I think that, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional. I read once that it was intentional, and that is that when we entered the European Union, it was a prerequisite that VAT must be exclusive on menus and on invoices and so on, unless you're a business, and then it could be exclusive. And that's because they wanted it apparently to be simpler for people making purchases, unlike America, where you buy something and then you've got a sales tax. Whereas I think whether again, like I said, whether it was intentional or unintentional, what it's done is it's moved all the burden onto the business, who now has that hidden collection, because not everybody cares. They don't know. They're just giving you £10. They don't know that 167 of that has VAT on it. They're not even concerned about that. They're just paying for whatever it is they've bought, and they go. So if there's any price increase, that's your fault. And so, and I do think that maybe there's an argument that says that, if we did have a more of an American system, that maybe people would do the maths a bit more and then be more offended when that percentage went up and down.
Yes, I mean, you're right. We have to display prices inclusive of VAT. It's got to be a complete and transparent price. But there's nothing to stop us as operators on receipts or in posters being able to explain to customers how much of that bill is tax, not just VAT, but all the other taxes that come out. I think we did the last calculation we did at UKHospitality. It's about 38% of the price is a tax and goes back to the exchequer. So we can do that on receipts, and we can communicate that more, and maybe do it graphically as well to show how much of the pizza, how much of the burger, how much of the cup of coffee, how much of the pint is taken up with taxes.
So what interested me recently is that because obviously hospitality is such a huge umbrella term, but a friend of mine was telling me recently that actually pubs actually do get to claim back quite a lot of VAT, whereas restaurants don't, because a lot of their restaurant, a lot of it's 0 rated, but a pub, the beer they buy, for example, has VAT on it that carries through. Margins are still slim. That wasn't the debate we were having, but I didn't quite realise that actually a lot of their purchases can be redeemed, whereas a restaurant can't.
Yes, it's particularly restaurants where it's most acute. And you have got that food element that is the big issue of concern.
So going back to the terminology of hospitality, how do you, I think I might have even gone down this road with you in the past, but it's not so much about UK hospitality. It's just as in the organisation, it is the term hospitality. It represents pubs, restaurants, sometimes street food, hotels. Where do you draw the line? Because I think many in the takeaway industry probably don't feel like they're part of hospitality. And then, I think we'll just unpack that one first.
Yeah, I think that is a real challenge. I think many in the takeaway industry see themselves more as retail.
Like Greggs see themselves as retail, don't they?
Yes, exactly. Pret, I think, probably see themselves. To me, hospitality is about the experience. It's about the service. It's food and drink, meeting, a space for socializing out of home. I would classify all of those that you've talked about as being hospitality, because you are usually providing a service. You're providing that space to go and socialize, even if it is just a seat beside a burger van or a takeaway stand or a street food stall. But I think, there is that from a premises perspective. I think there is that definition as well as to, are you retail? Are you in that retail classification? Are you rated as retail? That's probably where that drives it from.
Yeah.
But for me, it's eating and drinking out, events, entertainment, sleeping. It's a home away from home.
So McDonald's, where does that one fall?
McDonald's to me is hospitality. There's a large proportion of that is eat-in sales, is an alternative to something that you would have at home.
Yeah,
that's my test.
No,
is it an alternative to what I would do at home?
Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah, I think because I always sort of say that when after I do a podcast with you, people say, I don't know if she's like if she sort of represents takeaways. Well, they do, but it's not fully in there, and nor is a takeaway fully under the umbrella of hospitality. I think it's somewhere there, but it does sort of sit between retail and hospitality. It's somewhere right in the middle, isn't it?
It does, and I guess if you are a pure takeaway outlet, you may find that there's a smaller specific trade association that would better cater for your needs as a business if you're
Like
looking
a sandwich
for business
association,
support.
let's say. Yeah.
Sandwich association, the fish fryers, those kind of areas. However, when it comes to who are you wanting to have representing you at government, you kind of, there's probably only 10 seats around that
Yeah.
table with the big ministerial teams. Finance, energy, you will get retail, but that's the representative who is also British Retail Consortium, is also convenience stores, is also large supermarkets, is also clothing.
So you have to bundle up essentially, don't you?
You have to bundle up.
Yeah.
You are never going to get the Sandwich Association sitting at that table alongside the rest of us when it comes to Rachel Reeves. You may well do when it comes to a small minister that's looking at high streets.
Yeah.
You may very well have that. So do I represent, when I go into those meetings and I'm with 10 other large sectors of the economy, probably 7 that are sectoral, the rest that are general business, do I take it upon myself to make sure that I'm commenting and representing and arguing for those small independent startup businesses, those takeaways, those street food stalls? Yes, of course. Of course. And then when you're talking about access to finance, you're talking about business support, you're talking about food regulation, all of those. My aim is to get those small businesses exempt where I can, to get the regulations as workable as possible, to get the recognition of the support and the contribution, and most importantly, to get an understanding at a central government level of how important those businesses are culturally and socially, and to the vibrancy of town centres. If you've got markets, or I was at the Great British Beer Festival in the NEC earlier this week. Brilliant. You've got all sorts of independent brewers in a big hangar style hall. What brings it to life is the street food stalls outside. That's where people were congregating in the day when they were drinking their beer, talking about beer, and the NEC was doing business, and there was business being done there at the trade show. But clearly that's the kind of role that I play in articulating how important those businesses are, and also how it's important as a seed bed for entrepreneurship. So, am I going to talk to technicalities or be able to understand the technicalities of some of those business models? No. Do we provide support for all of those independents? Yes. We have independent coffee shops, pubs, cafes. We don't tend to have street food, but we will have, the likes of Curb, who do work to provide those routes to market for street food operators. We do work with market operators as well. So yes, we do represent. And my big argument back would be, if you don't like what I'm saying, if you don't think I'm representing you, you have to join. We have segments, and small independent segments, with coffee shops, as I say, food to go. We have the big chains, we have small independents. It's one member, one vote. People give me their views on a grassroots basis, and I'm really open to dialogue with anybody. But if you don't feel I represent you, you have an argument to make if you're a member of mine and I'm not representing you effectively. But if you're not a member, and you're not a member of any other group, then you can't really argue about representation. It's the same as voting in a general election. All of those organisations we've talked about are membership organisations.
Yeah.
They're directed and controlled by their membership.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and like you say, if you've got to have a voice, you've got to direct it in a certain way. And yeah, if you can't just, I think what we see a lot of now, and I think there's this high expectation because of social media, because someone might see you at an event with Rachel Reeves, let's say, and lots of others, they'll be like, why didn't you tell her this? They don't know what you said. All they can see is a photo of you smiling next to it, like you're meant to look angry. I'm not sure what you're meant to do in that event. I don't think I'd even look angry at an event like that, to be honest, because you just wouldn't. And I understand there's a lot of frustration on the ground level, but that's not productive for you to go to a meeting and be angry in the photo shoot or actually ignore the counterpart. And
yes, yeah, and there is a lot of frustration with government policy at the moment, and we do articulate it. You have to articulate it in the right way and in the right space. But equally, if you're invited to attend a meeting and it's to discuss planning and licensing and business rates and upward only rent reviews, yes, that doesn't fix some of the basic elements that people are really concerned about. And I don't need to be told that VAT is the answer. I do know, but if you're invited in to talk about some of the other areas that would help, it's incumbent upon me, I think, to be able to go along and make that representation. And I always do explain that this doesn't offset NICs, this doesn't offset national living wage or any of the other challenges, but anything that can help, as Tesco says, every little helps.
Yeah, I did a podcast with a VAT specialist last year, 2 episodes, and really nice guy. But he believes that the way that VAT has been implemented in the UK has been butchered since its inception. And he says the Europeans have probably done a better job because he said we use it as a hammer in the UK, whereas in Europe it's used as a scalpel. And he said we shouldn't have anything 0 rated, and we shouldn't have, most things shouldn't be 20% either. And he said it should be more targeted. So, for example, I don't know, sandwiches at the supermarket could be 8%. Because there is value added there, and a beer at the supermarket could be 10%, and a beer at the pub could be 14%, or whatever. Just and he said, but the problem is we've been a bit lazy about the implementation in the UK, and it's gotten off to too many false starts, and this is why now you've just got 0 and 20.
Yes, yeah, and also when we went into Europe. And the single market was implemented in the mid-1990s, that's when the European Union harmonised its VAT rates. It didn't say they all had to be the same, but it basically set the rules to say you could have 2. And virtually nobody else in the EU uses 0 rated. So for our politicians, naturally, what they were lobbying for at a European level was the ability to keep 0. It's children's clothes, food, newspapers, really quite fundamental issues. We did have a lower rate, but this is why when you look at European countries that have 2 rates of VAT, one that is a lower rate at about 8 to 11%, and that's applied to hospitality, they've always had that. They've always had those 2 tiers, and they don't have a 0. We just have that big discrepancy. So you're right. The VAT system hasn't been fit for purpose. One of the advantages of Brexit is that you can have those multiple rates now that were talked about. That was why we did get 12.5%, because previously the lower rate was 5%, and very few items were at 5%. So you can do that. You can be more sophisticated. Although good luck to any chancellor that decides to put VAT on something new. Because those of us with long memories knowing George Osborne and the pasty tax, trying to put a tax on Greg's pasties, that went badly wrong.
And if you look back to that, they were genuinely trying to clean up the VAT system.
They were.
Yeah, and I know, and a lot of people think that Greg's campaigned heavily there. That wasn't really Greg's. It was the tabloids, the red tops.
It was the Sun.
Yeah, the Sun.
It was the Sun.
And they mobilised all of this outrage, and Greg sort of jumped on the bandwagon to make it look like they did a great job. But it wasn't. They sort of just joined in at the right time. But they have followed the law. They followed the letter of the law. But I could argue from their point of view, like that actually their sales today, forget what happened back then, what was that, 2008-ish? Their sales today depend more on hot food. You go into any Greg's, the ambient section has shrunk over the last 5 years, especially post-COVID. It used to be that the ambient section was all there was. Now there's hot holding ovens, there's all sorts. And so I think they probably contribute more to VAT than most, to be honest. So I think if VAT was simplified somewhat and reduced and broadened, I could see how they would probably like that, because I think takeaways would probably hate the fact that they would have more competition from Greg's, but I think it's coming anyway. I think Greg's are nipping away at everyone's heels, aren't they?
They are. They are. They're doing a great job. They are sort of the Wetherspoons of the food market, aren't they?
Yeah.
They offer a good quality product at a key price point. I think you're right. If you were looking at it logically from a business perspective, operational and economic perspective, the logic says reform VAT, change and transform what it applies to, look at what it applies to in a supermarket, rotisserie chickens, ready meals. Politically, I think that's a really difficult one for any chancellor to go down, and
Nobody
I think
wants to do it
it's forced
because
into U-turns.
what do they win? They win nothing. Consumers don't get it, don't care. They don't care that. Let's say, for example, the new system, the hypothetical new VAT system, is broadened all out of home food for a moment, and that includes sandwiches, you name it, from supermarkets, Subways, and so on. And let's say the new figure was 10%. The tabloids are not going to say, hey, guess what? Your fish and chips or Domino's pizza is now 10% less. They're going to say, your sandwich is now 10% more. And
Yes.
yeah, and that's half the problem, isn't it?
It is. It's a huge challenge. And, the Chancellor's backed herself into a corner because she said she wasn't going to touch VAT. That was one of the areas that she did say she would look at in terms of increasing it. And you're right. However you dress it up, if you're dealing with some of those areas in supermarkets and out of home, you are putting a tax on for the first time. So it would be a brave chancellor at the present moment in time that would do that.
I think there is.
But I agree with you; it does need to be looked at.
There is some logic, the words value added tax. Those two words, value added, I think I might have said this to you before. I can make a sandwich at home,
Totally.
And so if I buy one, that is a luxury in itself. It's value added, and the fact that some items are VAT free, it boggles the mind. And again, I think it's very similar to VAT collection in some ways. Is very similar to. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar to business rates. It seems like it's not disproportionate. It's disproportionately spread, and
yes,
and so
the burden of VAT. If you're in an office or an IT company or manufacturing, VAT is just an administrative point. You fill in your forms, but it's basically money in, money out.
Exactly.
It's just dealt with. The reason that operators in our sector feel so hard done by, particularly at the small end, is that they feel that they're unpaid tax collectors.
Well, they are, pretty much.
A large amount of money that they're paying each month. It has real cash flow implications. And cash is king in our business. So, they are unpaid tax.
I guess they are unpaid tax collectors, and that is sort of the deal. And also, if I don't want to stick up for HMRC here or the Treasury, but people going into that industry sort of knew that was what was going on before they did it. But it's a real tough one, isn't it? But
it feels if the sun is shining, if the world is going well, if business is booming, in those boom years, we did have them between 2008 and 2018, post-financial crash, when lots of new hospitality was opening up. There was good access to capital. Consumers felt buoyant, before all of the challenges. It doesn't matter that you are an unpaid tax collector because there is enough money to go round and you're getting a fair share. Where people feel unhappy about it is if they are making no money, they are working all the hours that God sends to be able to keep their business afloat. They are doing more and more. They're paying themselves less and less. That's when it feels a burden of being an unpaid tax collector. But when the good times are there, it doesn't feel so hard. They don't feel so hard done by.
Yeah, and look, I've been in this side, the takeaway fish and chip side of the industry since I was 18, 19, and even back then, I remember people were talking about VAT being regressive. It's 17.5%, and it's only gone up since. All right, it's dipped a little bit when there's been crises, but for the most part, it's been going in one way over the years. The last government didn't care. The government before that didn't care, or at least they didn't absorb the message that VAT was hard on people, or at least hard for people to collect and pass on. Do you think this government is going to get it? How much faith do you have in them? I know when I follow your Twitter feed, you could say anything. You could say, I've been talking about NIC today, and 19 of the 20 responses underneath are going to be, we need a VAT cut. You could talk about, smoking outdoors, and it's going to be, we need a VAT cut. And how do you go against that when all members seem to just want the VAT cut? They're not interested in all the little things. They just want a VAT cut. And how hard is telling government that?
It's really difficult, and the industry can at times look a little bit naive. If there is something that is announced or that is threatened or that is happening on that day that you are responding to in the news, in all of those kind of examples that you've just given, you look tin-eared and tone-deaf to just be talking about VAT. You've got to respond to the initiative that's there in front of you as to what's happening with jobs, what's happening with livelihoods, what's happening with businesses. We all know that the VAT route would give a quick and easy solution. It would inject some oxygen into the P&L. It would reduce prices to consumers. It would help with inflation. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we've got really difficult public sector finances. So yes, we do say it, but we say it in the right way at the right time, and we make sure that it's always there as a steady drumbeat behind everything that we do. That's why we launched the Taxed Out campaign so early. That's why we really need the operators and the businesses to get behind it and make sure that message is fed through, because they are better equipped at times to be able to pass that message on directly to their customers, directly to the MPs if they get them to visit their sites. It can't all just be left to one individual or one organisation. We have to get everybody behind it. That way, VAT is always constantly there in the background, but we can then deal with the issues that come up that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
You mentioned that VAT, if it was dropped, it would give people breathing space and so on. But, when I talk to shop owners, restaurant owners, all sorts, and I'll say to them, what would you do if hypothetically VAT was dropped to 10%? They'll say, I wouldn't drop my prices. So would that not be inflationary? Do you get where I'm coming from? Because if
demand went, that is a concern that the government does have, and that the Bank of England is constantly there on the shoulder. I mean, if you're the Chancellor, you've got a good angel and a bad angel.
Mm-hmm.
The good angel is the Bank of England saying 2% inflation. You've got to do everything to keep that down. You've got to stop people spending. And the bad angel on the other shoulder is me saying, but the businesses need people to go out and spend and have footfall. You need to encourage people to go out and have a bit of a consumer boom. That there is a concern, yes. There's a concern within government that prices would not come down and you're at a very high level. There is a concern that demand would spike and you'd get inflationary pressures coming back through, and inflation is not under control yet. And there is also a concern that would not necessarily be used to boost wages, salaries, employment. It would just be taken into profits.
Yeah, and again, from the other side, we haven't even considered. We've got an obesity pandemic in the UK. People are jumping onto Ozempic and all these other products, SGLPs, and you think, well, if we then drop VAT, let's assume that everyone does drop it and demand goes up. Like, could that also spike another problem? Like, would they use it as an excuse? I don't know. Do those conversations ever come up in those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think they would use it as an excuse, because at the moment, when anybody comes and talks to us about smoking outdoors, outside premises, high fat, salt, sugar bans, calorie restrictions, there's still a live debate in the Department of Health about, should we be capping portion sizes? Should we be restricting main courses to certain calorie levels? Should we be banning the advertising even of premises that serve high fat, salt, sugar foods? Should we be restricting alcohol advertising? All of that is pushed back at the moment because it's too costly for businesses that are struggling to manage the current situation. If you get that demand generation, if you get that cut or a VAT cut, yes, those siren voices will be listened to more by people within government to say, hang on a minute, we need to control what the population is doing.
Yeah, and
you can see that today. I mean, just today we're talking about the Chancellor filling the black hole. One report comes out, says they've got a £50 billion black hole that they need to fill with taxes. Gordon Brown is there saying really significantly ramp up the taxes on gambling in order to cut the 2-child cap for child benefit. Again, there's a stream and a seam within the Labour Party that says the route to solving this and to helping get out of the black hole is sin taxes, gambling, alcohol, food. There was talk of a salt tax, a higher sugar tax on food. all of those things would come into the mix. And I have no doubt that if you cut VAT, you'd have it replaced pretty quickly by consumption taxes.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think there is this utopia that we'll drop VAT and the government's just going to take that line down. You know, is it the fourth or sixth biggest income to the, you know, so they're not just going to sit there, you know, saying, oh yeah, it's fine, you know, we'll replace, you know, they're not going to say we don't, you know, I read 41 billion, but it doesn't matter, the numbers are big, like, so they're not just going to say, oh yeah, we'll just carry on as we are, like they need to.
And that is the challenge, and we have provided them with the evidence, but that is the challenge. There's twofold. There's an immediate cost to them. And if you were the Chancellor at the present point in time, if you were this Chancellor, the cost of cutting it to 12.5% is £4.5 billion. So it's a big amount of money. And that's money that you would, have to find from a different form of tax, because she is very Mr. McCorber, money in, money out. And the Treasury rules require you to do that. You can't have a loss in the first year. You would make it back up in demand in later years. You'd have that J curve. But also, you are making tough choices. £4 billion is spending that you could put somewhere else. And so I think, you know, that's why we have to be realistic that when we're going in and talking about this isn't like COVID. We were closed down. We were singled out. We were a separate sector. The whole of the economy is hurting at the moment. We're disproportionately hit by NICs, but the whole of the business community is hurting. And therefore there are difficult decisions, which is why we do always talk about other options that the Chancellor has to help support our sector to get us back into growth. And they will be different for different businesses, and some businesses will undoubtedly say, from, you know, the takeaways, the street food sector that you were talking about earlier, they won't have such a concern about business rates. But we've got to get it rebalanced, because that helps with the investment in the high street.
I think there's two syntaxes that I could think of that have probably worked. One is obviously smoking, like that has, you know, driving up taxes on cigarettes has massively decreased consumption, and you can see it's worked. So that's one. The other one is probably the sugar tax on drinks. You can see how reformulation has been really good there, and you know, most people now are happy to drink a Coke Zero, Diet Coke, although Diet Coke's been around for a long time. Where it's been a failure is if you look at chocolate bars. You know, you look at a Mars bar duo, or even a packet of crisps that says share on it. No one's sharing those things. So, and you know, what's going to stop a restaurant from just having a main course that's, for argument's sake, 300 grams or whatever, 500 calories, and people just ordering two? People just they just jump over those things. But one of the big things I think with these syntaxes, and I think it's not a syntax, but it feels like it. One benefit of having pubs that are busy or restaurants that are busy is that people are forming social bonds. And you can't do that if you're at home drinking a pint, looking at a wall, like, you know, or watching telly or whatever. Like, I understand that there is a lot of people now, and just like 2008, that choose to go buy a crate of beer from the supermarket and sit at home and drink it. That's not good socially.
No, there is that social contribution. We've done a social productivity index as well, because the government tends to judge industries by economic productivity, and we're labour intensive. So we're always going to fall down on productivity. But we are socially productive. We do provide community service. We do provide a social space for people to come together to combat loneliness. If you're eating or drinking in one of our venues, it is a sort of controlled environment. You know, you're right, nobody is necessarily going to stop you if you go into a supermarket and buy a whole load of stuff. But if you've had too much to drink, or you're ordering too many drinks on your own in a pub, somebody is going to stop you because it's an offence, and you've got that twice licensed environment within which people are operating. You've also got a similar kind of environment within restaurants as well, for looking at the most extreme areas where people might be needing to come together and get a safe space to be able to socialise and enjoy. And also those venues, they're heavily employers, I should say. You know, if you're buying a large amount of food and drink to take home and consume at home, you're not generating the tax take from PAYE. That's also a large proportion of where our total tax take as the sector comes from, is PAYE and employing people. And again, having a job is socially good. giving people routes through supported pathways into employment in their local community is socially good. We are a socially mobile sector. You don't have to have degrees. You don't have to have experience in order to get a foothold in the sector to learn and develop your skills. And we're entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So, all of that needs to be communicated as well to the government. And if you get vibrant and dynamic high streets, town centres, neighbourhoods, those businesses alongside will flourish.
Yeah. Look, it's a personal anecdote, but it's true nonetheless, and it's important. A friend of mine over COVID became very insular, very lonely. I think a lot of people went through that over COVID and maybe didn't jump straight back into his old routine post-COVID.
Mm.
And then, I remember seeing him and he was depressed and down, and he'd be like looking at his phone and always just staring at his phone and doom scrolling. And then his parents just said to him, look, you've got to go to the pub and see your friends. And then they dragged him there the first time. And this is a guy in his 25, 24, something like that. They drag him to the pub. And next thing you know, they drag him again. And then the week after, he goes on his own. And then he meets him at the gym. And then they go again to the pub. And the week later, they're going for something to eat. And before you know it, he's now back into that social group. And I think that now you could argue drinking Guinness twice a week, 3 times a week, if you're looking at it on paper only, you're probably going to say, well, that's not very good. Well, actually, what's the cost of him not going and then, having depression issues and so on? So I do think we need to be more social. I think there's really important,
Absolutely. And you could see the problems that caused during COVID with people not being able to have access to social spaces. And community spaces, and we provide that. And also when we take young people and take those kind of young people on as employees as well, we work in teams. It's a very nurturing environment. You have fun. You're part of a cohort. You're sort of part of you have that camaraderie as well that you don't get when you're working remotely.
Yeah.
And again, you've got that whole generation that are working from home, sitting at a computer, doing what we're doing, talking to somebody online, but they're not interacting in the real world.
Yeah. Once you switch off, you're not saying, oh, how's it going? Oh, how's the kids? Or, you've just, I think Steve Jobs used to call it, what was it? Water bottle talk,
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember reading an article on how he designed the first Apple offices, and that the toilets were on one side of the building and every floor had exactly the same. So the toilets, you had to walk through the whole office to get to the left, and you had to walk to the whole office to the right to go to the stairwell or the lift. And it forced people to go opposite ways throughout, whatever time of the day. And what you're doing is you're stopping and you're saying, hey, John, how are you getting on with that project? Or how's Maureen? And you're having a conversation. Whereas you don't do that when you're doing Zooms all day. You just don't, that's not happening.
No, and we create that space within our work environment because we're having to interact with each other as colleagues, but we're also having to interact with customers. So we are beneficial twice over from that mental health and well-being point of view. And again, that's one of the reasons why government should be supporting us.
Yeah, I just don't think they think that far. I don't know if they, and that's not an insult. I just don't know if I'm not. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I don't know if they think that far ahead. So, or if they say, well, you know what? Yeah, the long run is people will be healthier mentally over the long run, but that you've got the health department screaming that, well, we've got type 2 diabetes on the rise. How do you balance the two?
That's where it's so important to be having those well-rounded, meaningful conversations with government, usually in a venue, to be able to sort of show and tell, and you can't just have that one-dimensional campaign that is about tax. It's got to be about the broader community engagement and involvement and what we do, whether that's grassroots music or first jobs or jobs for neurodiverse people or training or skills. You just got to be able to talk about that in situ with all of those ministers to educate them.
Yeah. And, I saw that table that you shared the other day on X about VAT standard versus hospitality across Europe. And it is interesting, because, all my family's from Cyprus, I was there, and I do always look at the receipt because that's what I do. And I'm probably quite rare because I own a business and I take photos of the receipts to put them through the business. So you do see the tax element always, and sometimes it does shock you. But what I did notice, and again, this is where the terminology hospitality matters, not so much for you, but for our industry. I think a lot of these countries that have a lower rate for hospitality, it doesn't include takeaways.
No.
Yeah, it only means sitting down, dining in. And again, that's not a bad thing for pubs and restaurants, but I was just trying to clarify the difference for people in our industry who probably don't know
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a lot of those cases, it doesn't apply to alcohol.
That's right, because that's always going to be
So
standard rated. Yeah.
it's always standard rated. And so, in some cases it is takeaway, in some cases it's not. In a lot of those European countries as well, it's more for the hotel accommodation than it is for food,
Yeah.
because it's about their tourist industry and it's about the visitor economy. But equally then, I get a lot of hoteliers will say, but look at the VAT rate, and you've got tourism taxes and local taxes
They're
that go on top
topping
of
it up
that.
with other things. Yeah. So obviously you're campaigning for it, but is there a sort of a part of you that thinks, be careful what you wish for? Because there is an element of that being said here in my mind, that, yeah, there's all these things that we could probably drop, but don't think they're not going to top it up with something else somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I don't think it's a be careful what you wish for. It is, let's go into this with our eyes wide open and be pragmatic and grown up and have a grown up conversation. And open those conversations around things like tourism tax. When people are talking about it, you can offset it with VAT. So it's more the pragmatic political dialogue that you need to go into for any form of negotiation or discussion.
I think the problem is, from a business, well, from my point of view, I'm just thinking out loud here. If I went to book a hotel and it had 20% VAT, I can claim that back. But if it was a tourism tax, I probably can't claim that back, if I'm right. So I think...
this is where you get into the complexity of, is it a tax or is it a levy?
Yeah.
Who's liable for it? The hotelier or the consumer? All of those kind of things.
Well, pretty much everything's going to be passed on to the consumer. I don't,
It is,
yeah.
but in a business sense of being able to reclaim it. We're in danger then of getting into is a jaffa cake a cake or a biscuit?
Absolutely.
For VAT purpose. And that's where it becomes quite complex. And that's where the whole of the tax code needs simplifying. And actually government needs to look at simplifying the whole tax landscape.
Do you not feel like I wasn't a huge fan of this government coming in? I don't know if you heard the podcast I did with Alan, your counterpart.
Yes.
I was a little skeptical, but I thought, you know what? One thing I do sort of agree with is maybe we need change. Like, you can't deny that. We've had 14 years of the last lot. They've been through a lot. We've all been through a lot, so let's just change. It can't be that bad. And then by the first budget, I think everybody was just like, what?
Yes.
And so one thing that makes me think, you're working with both sides all the time, and obviously that switches because of when they're in government and when they're not. A lot of people, I touched on it before, a lot of people thought the last lot were out of touch. Now they think this lot's out of touch. A lot of people think you have this magic wand to make all MPs hear what you've got to say. And you may make them hear what you've got to say, but that doesn't mean they need to do anything that you say. So how do you then judge members and non-members' expectations with, well, you've got access to them, why haven't you fixed this problem?
I think it's just about good communication, and that's why it's so helpful to come on the podcast, this podcast particularly, but other podcasts too, is to just say, look, I'm really working hard. The team is working hard. We've brought together a compelling argument, but you don't always get what you want. And that's not necessarily the fault of anybody who's not doing something. There isn't a stone that we've left unturned or something that we haven't done or people we haven't met. My team are out meeting hundreds of MPs over the course of the last year to be able to make sure that they understand our business, that they understand the benefits and the positivity that we bring, all the things we've talked about, then understand P&Ls and the business environment and what's driving it. But these MPs will have businesses from every part of the constituency, from every part of the economy, doing the same thing. So, we are working as hard as we can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they as individual MPs have the ability to change policy. Ministers don't necessarily have the power to change policy, and it rests with the Chancellor, and she has to balance the books and she will make decisions. And hospitality is a big part of the economy, but it isn't the only part of the economy. And that's why we really, really do need everybody else to get behind and write those letters, because even if you've written 4 or 5 times before. I've worked in an MP's office in the past, and I've worked in ministerial offices and teams. It is simply weight of correspondence. So if an MP is getting 500 letters a day and they're all about all sorts of other things, and they don't hear from any hospitality businesses in their local patch, they will often say back to me, but I'm not hearing it. My local businesses are not telling me that. You're telling me the national picture, but I'm not hearing it.
Yeah.
And so, you need 10, 50, 100 letters going into that MP, and then they wake up and think, oh my goodness, this is a real issue. I'm losing businesses here, or I'm losing votes.
It's almost like before one person goes to send a letter, it's almost like, say if you're in a little town like Atherstone, where I live, it's a very small town near Tamworth. It's almost like before one person sends a letter, they should all talk to each other and all send a letter at the same time, because that would probably make more sense if 15 cafes, there's like so many cafes in Atherstone, but if 15 cafes and coffee shops sent a letter to their local thingy, all of a sudden it's not just one, it's 10 on the high street. And I think that might be louder.
Yes. But the drip on stone is how I always talk about it. It's you do have to have that continuous drip approach that gets the message across, because they will read about it in the papers, and you can see me on the BBC and you can read me in the broadsheets, and the MPs do. And they'll get briefings from us, and they'll say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because that's what your job is. But actually, if they've got somebody saying, I don't know how I'm going to afford to employ 5 people in the future, that's 5 voters that are losing their jobs. And hospitality, if you lose a plant, if you have Port Talbot Steelworks close, or a car plant, it's a big impact on one geographical area. The issue is you can close 5 or 6 pubs or 5 or 6 cafes in a local area, and you don't see that cumulative impact. It's only when it's got past a tipping point that you realise you've got a third of the businesses in a high street boarded up. There's nobody going into the town centre, and then you're wondering why. So we've got to make sure that that's just continually front and centre of their minds. And I know lots of people on X and on social media and generally will berate MPs for not being business people. But that's our job. We've got to educate them so they understand the realities of running a business. And I produce very simple 5-line P&Ls for them, just so they can see what the costs are that are going through.
I think there's a lot of this stupid arguing. Like I'm not being funny. If I had cancer, and I hope I never do, but I wouldn't not choose a doctor because they haven't had cancer. Like, this is the stupidest thinking ever. And they are elected. So, and it often makes me think when people say, well, you voted for them. Now we're all feeling the pain. It's not like that one person is solely responsible. I see a lot of that directed at Sacha Lord. Like, I see a lot of the comments against him. Well, you voted for Labour. You campaigned for them. Well, it doesn't make it his fault. He's allowed to vote. We're all allowed to vote. So it's not one person's collective fault because somebody voted. So I think everything's overly simplified. And I think this is where I think people need to step back and look at the broader picture a little bit, like as you're trying to discuss and explain. But just saying it's Kate's fault because they assume you voted a certain way, because you haven't said, not that I've read anywhere, you've not said how you know.
I have to be politically neutral.
Absolutely.
My job it requires me to be politically neutral. So I advocate for the industry.
Absolutely.
I don't advocate for anything else.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think we descend into very black and white arguments on social media, and I think if we assume that people working for this sector, for the industry, are doing it in good faith to try and help as many people as they possibly can, are doing their very best, give them the benefit of the doubt, whether that's Sacha or myself or anybody else running any of the other trade bodies. We're trying our best and we're trying our hardest, and it's not necessarily our fault if the government don't take what we say as gospel.
No, There is a few other things though, like you mentioned if people aren't feeding back information to government. But one thing that always makes me wonder, I do wonder, do government look at different data sets? Because there are some success stories on the high street, well,
Yes.
or even with restaurants. Like if you go into a Nando's, you go into a Burger King, a Five Guys. We were somewhere. We were at Darts Farm the other day in Devon. It was heaving. We went to on the way back from Bristol to Gloucester service. You couldn't move. And I was thinking to myself, with this overall sort of spending crisis that everyone's talking about, is it that the consumer is being a lot more selective about where they spend their money? And why are we seeing that, some chains or some groups seem to be doing really well and other sort of independents seem to be doing really bad? Like, is there any patterns that you can see, and maybe something that the government is seeing that we're not seeing?
I mean, government does have its very top level data sets. They have authoritative data and they'll get research and they'll have information coming through the ONS, which is the Office for National Statistics. They'll have HMRC data. They will have a lot of that kind of information coming from business surveys and questionnaires. They will also have business surveys that come in from the likes of us, from the CBI, from the FSB, sentiment surveys and trackers. They put those down at a lower level because you can't always, they're self-selecting. They are from a specific sector. But we try and give them as much authoritative information as we can that comes from EPOS data. And if I had £1 for every politician that said exactly the same kind of thing that you've just said to me, I went into my local high street and 3 of my restaurants were heaving. I couldn't get a table. It was 7:00 on a Saturday night and it was packed. The money coming through the front door is not enough to cover the cost of doing business. Even if you're in one of those big chains and you are rammed full, quite often you're not necessarily busy all the time that you need to be. And with the cost levels, you probably need to be having that level of busyness every day of the week, every trading hour of the week that you've got. And it is possible to still have a lot of money coming through the front door and not be making a profit. And I think some of the independents don't tend to sweat that asset as much to be able to look with as hard head as some of the chains that have the ability to spread it across. So, that old adage that turnover's vanity, profit is sanity, people do need to keep looking carefully at that. The other thing that I think you find with independents, they have less resilience. They have fewer cash reserves. And that they only usually have one site. If one site is underperforming, and Nando's can pass that across the whole of the chain and be able to sustain that, or can decide to close a loss-making site. If you've only got one or two, you have no choice. You're stick or bust. You can't just trade your way out of it. So they can't take the longer term view. The worrying thing that I've seen when we were coming out of COVID, those cash reserves have not repaired themselves. So a quarter of businesses have less than 1 month's cash reserves. So they can't withstand any shock. So that's why it becomes critical if the freezer breaks down or, a supply doesn't happen. You don't have any buffer to be able to manage that process or trade your way out or manage a shock, and the P&L is just too tight. So for many of those businesses, I think that's what you're seeing. There is undoubtedly a polarization in consumers and a polarization in businesses. If you've got the right product in the right place at the right time, you're doing quite well. But you can equally have something that was hugely successful before COVID, was in a brilliant location, was trading exactly the right way, and town centre, city centre restaurants and late night would be typical of those. And just post-COVID, with the change in working patterns, you're now in the wrong location, or you're not getting the footfall coming through. So it's the most polarized I've seen the environment. The other challenging bit, consumer spending should be better. The consumer saving ratio, today's, again, news out today, the consumer saving ratio, household saving ratio, higher than it at the highest level it's been since COVID. And we saved masses during COVID. People are saving, they're not spending. They've got real terms wage growth coming through from national living wage, national minimum wage, public sector pay settlements, higher than inflation settlements across the private sector too. And again, people are not spending. So it's a confidence issue.
Yes, I was going to say, is that because people just don't know what's around the corner?
They don't feel as though they've got permission to spend. And they need permission to spend. And if you're looking at it, there was lots of green shoots this time last year when the election happened. We thought whether you voted for them or not, it was more a sense, as you say, of we have drawn a line under a really destabilizing period of Brexit, COVID, debt, energy, inflation, chaos at the top of government. You've got a new government coming in, and you had that sense of things can only get better, to use the D-Ream song that was associated with the 97 government.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think a lot of people felt that the incoming Labour government would be like Blair and things would be better. You saw that with consumer spending ticked up. You had green shoots of economic growth. Then we had the riots this time last year. And then you had things can only get worse. And we've got a £22 billion black hole and it's going to be grim. And the government talked the economy down and talked consumer confidence down. And they were setting expectations amongst lots of people about what they could do. But the net effect was consumers felt uncertain. You then had a budget where business was blindsided and felt that the trust had been broken. And it's had a real impact on jobs and investment. And people feel really, unsurprisingly, uncertain. I was talking to... I do go out and talk to politicians of all colours and persuasions. And I was talking to Reform MPs in coastal communities. And, they were saying, in some of those communities, you have a large number of boarded up shops in the high street. So that tells consumers that businesses are struggling. You've got crisis where you can't get summer jobs and graduate jobs. People can't find work. And the price of a fish and chip supper on a Friday is going up. Those are three key metrics that consumers use as to how well off do I feel? How worried should I be? What's going to happen in this year's budget? What's going to happen with interest rates? You've got all of that talk in the media about black holes of however big or small. How many taxes is Rachel Reeves going to have to put up? What's going to happen? Is inflation spiraling out of control again? No wonder consumers don't feel like going out and spending.
Do you think this government just hasn't been bold enough? Like, I know they said, we're going to need time to figure out a position, and that's why their manifesto didn't have to be overly thick and bold. And I think a lot of people are thinking they're going to come out the gates. And I remember doing a podcast with John Webber, head of ratings at Colliers. And I think I mentioned some of what he said at the time to you. And he, they were consulting government and telling them, look, here's what you need to do. You need to scrap it, go back to, make it fair for everybody. Because at the moment, the burden is on one major group. And when the budget came out, even he was blindsided, or everyone at Colliers was blindsided, because they were like, whoa, they've done nothing to rates. They've made it partially worse. And now he's saying that basically they'll tinker around the edges again and probably make it worse again. And again, you think,
that is a bit unfair, because we have got a permanently lower hospitality multiplier. So maybe Colliers were just talking to them about the wrong thing at the wrong time.
It could be that. Well, they do take a broader look at rates, I'd imagine, because they're not hospitality focused either. So we should have from April 26, but that's part of the issue. I think people were talking to them about reform of the apprenticeship levy, reform of business rates. The solution on a hospitality multiplier, I think, will be really good for our businesses when it comes in. I think it will also help some of those people move from street food markets and temporary pop-ups to a permanent site, because it will be permanently lower and you'll have that guarantee about what's going through for 3 years. But the pace of change is glacial, and the scale of the impact of what's happened. So they've, instead of doing, they've talked about jam tomorrow, but that's fine as long as you don't have a whole deluge of rotten vegetables. I was going to say, go on, say it. Go say something. I'll let you. No, but I get your point. Yeah, effluent.
Yeah. So,
I had the other word in my head, but yeah.
they dumped on us. And the thing that was blindsided, which broke trust, and I think once you've broken trust, it's very hard to get it back.
I,
Nobody knew what they
I
were going to
think,
do about Nick's
yeah,
and the
how they
threshold.
played with words over Nick's NIC. That was, oh, but we said we wouldn't do this. And you think, well,
Yes.
come on.
Yeah.
Like,
So,
yeah.
anything that they do now, even the business rate solution, when they announced the business rate solution in the budget, that was we were cheering. That was something we'd campaigned for. That was what them coming into government, we'd worked really hard on them. It's a good solution, but even that doesn't offset the scale of the challenge of Nick's. So, and as you say, for smaller businesses, they also had a reduction in the rateable, the rates relief. So even then, the Tory party had come in at the last budget before the election, had said it was going to go to zero. So everybody's expectations should have been zero. And then we got 40%. But even then they played it so badly that wasn't how it came out. It went from 75% to 40, rather than 0 to 40.
Many people in our industry and independents and little takeaways and little cafes, they're completely unaffected by rates. It doesn't even touch them. So they're like, I wrote.
Well, technically, theoretically, it does. And this is one thing that always gets my goat when somebody says, I don't know why you're campaigning on rates. It doesn't affect me. Whatever you do hasn't benefited me. And I think every year I slog my guts out to protect the small business cap. And to try and get it lifted. So every year we have to fight to get the 15,000 small business exemption. It's not there permanently.
I see. I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah.
So, without a lot of the work, it could just go.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe people in our industry, or at least, small independents, probably take it for granted then. They probably don't realise that you're fighting for that every year.
Yeah. But every year you have to fight it. It comes up. So to get that baked in and see if we can get that certain for 3 years, and then everything from 15,000 to 500,000 gets a lower hospitality multiplier.
Yeah.
Actually could be really helpful.
Is there not some logic here? And I don't know about this. You'd know better than me. But is there not some logic that if every business paid business rates, that they could be a lot lower across the board?
Yes.
Because if you've got exemptions everywhere, like when I did some research on this last year, Scotland, which is devolved, has like 9, maybe 12 different exemptions. And I was thinking, who is actually paying it? It's probably your Weatherspoons, your McDonald's, and your Amazons. Who else is actually paying it?
Yeah, and that is the issue, because it's based on whereabouts, how valuable the land is that you're sitting on, in a sense, and how much trade you're likely to get. So for hospitality, we are always in prime locations by our very nature.
Yeah.
They have to be where customers are, so they're always in the really good locations. Government likes it, same as they like VAT. We're sitting ducks. You can't evade it, avoid it. If you're there, you've got to pay it, unless somebody assesses you as being too small. But you're right. There's always that lobby. I think FSB always lobbies to try and get the small business threshold raised. But all that does is mean that anybody above that threshold is going to pay more. So yes, you could do it in the same way that VAT. You could say that everything has to have some rate of VAT on it. There will be winners and losers.
I've forgotten his name because I have, but the guy that owned Sports Direct and
Mike Ashley,
he did an article a few years ago or spoke somewhere, and he said that if you did like an online sales tax or purchases like trainers or whatever, and you had to collect it from the local shop. So let's say, for example, you order some shoes. If you ordered some trainers, let's say they were £100, let's say a 2% tax, 2% levy or whatever, to have it delivered, £102. But if you collected them, they're £2 cheaper. And because then you've dragged somebody to the local town centre to go in and purchase something. You'd hope while they're there, they pop into a Costa, grab a coffee, and make collect a few things whilst they're there. And I thought there was some logic to that. Maybe it was too simple for people to understand, but he actually said, look, this penalises our business to some degree because they treat each segment of their business independently.
Well, I did have a discussion with pre-election with a number of MPs about, could you do it through VAT? if you buy it online,
Mm-hmm.
it's 25% VAT.
And if you,
I mean, one of the loopholes they ought to close is Shine and Temu,
yeah,
where
absolutely.
it's sold and it comes direct from China, and therefore there's no VAT on that item of clothing. Marks and Spencers also do that as their business model. If you order through the Marks and Spencers app, or you order in store to get what you want, if it's delivered to your local store, it's free. There's no delivery charge. If you get it delivered to home, you're paying £6. It's not a different tax. It's just there is a delivery charge.
Yeah, because they're probably hoping if you're in the store, you're going to pop through the food hall. I know I would.
Exactly. And also they can stock a broader range in a small footprint store because they don't have to have every size in. You can see the dress that you like, or you can know that the business suit that's available in the city branch you can have delivered to your home store. So those kind of things matter. But I think there's creative uses. The government's business rates policy as well. So what they're looking at doing is for hospitality and small retail in high streets that has a rateable value between 15,000 and 500,000. They're going to reduce the multiplier by 20p. It's going to be paid for by putting a higher multiplier on the Amazon sheds that are the big fulfillment centres, not just Amazon, but ASOS,
100,000 square foot unit.
Those monster spaces
they're
that you
huge.
see on the M1. They are rated the same as your local booker at the moment. So if you put a higher multiplier, a higher bill on those, then you can pay for a reduction on the high street, and that does go some way towards redressing online versus offline.
Yeah, it just feels like, again, like if I'm going to agree with John to some degree, it is tinkering at the edges. And what we've just discussed is some major juicy bits, whereas they're just sort of like, well, we'll just nudge it a little bit. And if you're a Labour MP with that sort of majority, you must be really depressed that this is all you can pull off. Like, do you get what I mean?
I do.
It sounds like I'm sympathising with Labour, but actually, like, they have a strong majority. And they could probably pull off some juicy reform in lots of different segments.
And I think that they've got that, when you talk to them and you look at things like the industrial strategy. Now, I know that everybody in our sector looks at it and says hospitality is not mentioned. They've got 8 shiny sectors that they're prioritising. There is a whole chunk that is about the everyday economy, which is us. Retail, hospitality, high streets, the foundation, the infrastructure. That's how they talk about us, the bedrock on which economic growth is built. They've got big ideas in there that are talking about grid connectivity, reducing energy prices, infrastructure investment, housing investment, planning reform, business rates reform, skills. They take time to flow through. So they are looking at that of big reforms that will take 5 to 10 years. It's just everybody wants it now. And some of that is just a prioritization within government about what are they looking at. And some of it is just the frustration of how long does it take to get something through.
Absolutely.
So recently that you mentioned that picture of me with Rachel Reeves in Ronnie Scott's.
Oh yeah, that's I didn't remember that was that, but that was that, yeah.
That was about planning and licensing reform. And even some of those very small changes, tables and chairs outside, can you just give people permission to do it? Needs legislative change and takes, it's going to take about 6 months to get that through. Could be material if you are a small cafe and you want tables and chairs, or you're a street food stall and you just want some tables and chairs outside. That could be really helpful. But it all of that just doesn't happen. They can't just do it by a stroke of a pen.
Yeah, and I feel for you in that environment completely, because I see some of the... I think I messaged you recently because I'm reading some of the comments on X, and I'm trying to sort of defend you, and I'm trying to get this chap who was just one person, I can't remember if it was a woman or a man, I'm just like, just consider this for a moment. What would you do? And his logic didn't play out, but he just was so angry at you and saying you should stand down. And I'm like, bloody hell, like, she's doing her job. Like, and you think, what is wrong with people? And, just having a go because you're smiling in Ronnie Scott's, like, God forbid, like, it goes back to what I said earlier. You can't be expected to look miserable. Like, you've got to have a good conversation with these MPs on all sides, actually. So you can't go there and be angry. You're not a trade union, I guess.
No. And also, as you said earlier, I've got quite a diverse spread of membership. So if there's something that is being talked about late night in Westminster there is a subset of membership for whom that is hugely important, and therefore something that does look at agent of change, which is about making sure that existing grassroots music venues are protected when residents move in and complain about noise. That can destroy somebody's
Yeah.
business. To have the Deputy Prime Minister say, you know what, I'm going to introduce that as a piece of legislative change, that is good news. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it is helpful.
You see that a lot in farming as well. Like our warehouse and our new factory is essentially on a farm in the countryside, and people move to that area and then complain about the noise of the farm. And you're like, well,
yes,
how does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
you've just got it.
You've got people who've moved to Soho and are complaining about a bar operating at 8:00.
Yeah, or go buy a house in Heathrow and moan that there's a plane going over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that goes back to what I was saying. Let's just work on the basis that anybody who's working in the industry in a job that is requiring them to put themselves out there to try and help, let's just assume they're working in good faith and trying their best. And also, I think people ought to recognise that, how does it look if we are attacking our own? Because they are the people that are going up and talking to politicians and trying to represent it. Does it look like it's a sector that you would want to support if you get... And believe me, the stuff that you see on X in response to me is nothing compared to what goes on in my DMs, which are just horrendous.
I'd rather not know.
And also, if you're going to do that, I always think have the courage of your convictions and at least put your name to it.
Yeah.
Anonymous accounts or hiding behind a fake profile or attacking... Celebrate success. If you want to talk about how great Sasha is, and he's fantastic,
I'm not
brilliant campaigner, you don't need to tag in and say how crap you think I am.
Well, what are they hoping to gain from that? Like, it's just strange, like, again, I guess they're trying this divide and conquer thing, and they just think, and everyone jumps into tribes, and it's strange. But
and also there is that sensation, or there seems to be that sentiment that if it's not happening and documented on Twitter X, it's not happening.
Yeah.
And I don't live my life on the platforms. So, I will be talking to people outside of it.
A friend of mine always says to me, like, how is it that we've sort of like, we've given social media the power to give the 1% the loudest voice? Like, the 99% are carrying on with their day, doing their job, going to work, paying their bills, bringing up their kids. And the 1% is outraged about everything, whatever it is, like, of the day or the moment. And yet social media or even government even listen to it sometimes. Like, we've got to do something. No, you don't. Like, that is just 1% of the people.
The silent majority is sort of what you have to cling on to.
Yeah.
And also they are always the people who aren't joining, aren't part of anything.
They're not productive at all. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, one last sort of topic I want to sort of delve into is national living wage. It goes up every year. Like, we know it does. I do wonder, are we hitting a pattern now where maybe the last government would have been under recommendation to some degree? So if the, what's it called? Living wage?
The Low Pay Commission.
Low Pay Commission. I would imagine that government would have been always erring on the side of caution. Let's be careful. No, am I wrong? Did they go quite high on it as well then? Yeah, so these guys, I think they're always going to be over the recommendation. I think they've said, now I saw something come out yesterday, the recommendation is 1288, I think. Is that, no, more. I can't remember.
That's the remit that they've given them to maintain it at 66% median earnings.
Yeah.
That's what the data looks at doing. So the challenge is that whatever the recommendation has been, government has just accepted it.
Okay.
Governments of all colours.
Oh, really?
They've never gone across against what the Low Pay Commission has done from the day it was set, 1999. They've always gone with it. The last government gave it a remit to get the living wage to 66% of median earnings, irrespective of what was happening.
Okay.
And that's why we've had such big jumps that have gone up, because as you've had inflation going through, private sector employers at higher levels have put through higher wage increases, and it just churns through. And the Low Pay Commission hasn't really had any choice. It just analyses the data and says that's what it gets at. Yesterday, the remit came out and it's maintain it at 66%, but take account of economic circumstances and the impact on employment. So there is an opportunity if it looks as though it's coming too high to step away. I think, again, brave politician that doesn't do it, because you get a headline every year that the minister has increased pay for the lowest paid. And I always go back and say, ministers don't
Didn't,
pay
no,
people.
no.
And you only increase pay for the lowest paid if they can still have a job. You
Yeah.
can have a fair wage for a fair day's work, which is what the union mantra is, but only if you have a job.
Yeah, there's no point.
Um,
Yeah, there's no point in having a high minimum wage if you don't have a job.
yeah, exactly.
I listened to this American, I don't know what you call him, as a finance help social media guy, Dave Ramsey, and he had Donald Trump on his podcast or his radio station during the election. And Donald Trump probably should know better, but he said, we're creating jobs. And he goes, whoa. He goes, government don't create jobs. Government create the environment for businesses to create jobs. And actually, Donald Trump says, that's true. You're right. And I thought, you know what? We miss this when governments celebrate their wins. Oh, we've increased minimum wage. Well, actually, yeah, you've made it pretty hard, though. You know,
Yeah.
and yes, and especially with the added NIC, they're pushing more people at a younger age into paying tax. Obviously, letting them vote now. So I can see there's a bit of a game. Well, not letting them yet, but they're planning to. There's a bit of a game being played to some degree. And you think, well, they're just pushing them into paying tax at an earlier age, aren't they?
Yes. And you're right. You know, you have to have the conditions have to be right for businesses to be able to create jobs. They also have to be right to have that national living wage translate through into higher take-home pay. So if the response from the businesses, and this is what we're hearing a lot, is in order to afford the NICs, I've had to cut staff hours. I've had to cut headcount. We've taken out shifts. We're not opening as long as we were. That means those workers don't get that opportunity to work the hours that they want. Equally, for many of them, they're now juggling it against universal credit. And so, again, you don't get the increase in take-home pay. So, the Low Pay Commission, when it was first set up and it was first making recommendations, it was designed to be a floor below which wages should not fall. Now you've got government setting effectively the wages for about 70% of the population through public sector and through national living wage. And it's having that real ratcheting up effect. So I think there is a point now at which government needs to carefully think about what it's doing and to think through the consequences of all of these policies and join the dots. You know, you've got NIC and national living wage arguably pulling against each other. The aspiration of 80% employment and moving people from welfare into work, you don't have when you've got the NIC increase. And then you've got the employment rights bill, 0 hours contracts, all of that kind of restriction that's coming through and regulation that's coming through, making flexible employment, part-time employment more difficult. You know, the government needs to determine what its priorities are. And that's often what I find myself doing with ministers, is saying, you know, what is the objective you want us to focus on? If it's paying people more, we can't do it while we've got all these other things. So what do you want us to do?
One thing I've seen in our industry, talking to a lot of people, is they've condensed hours, working hours, especially because of energy prices and wages. So where they were doing 7-day weeks, they're now doing 5.5-day weeks. And where they were doing 12 hours a day, they're now cut it down to 8 hours a day. And, you know, that probably creates a nice big saving. But can you imagine what that does to the economy when you're trimming down like that?
Absolutely. We did a recent survey, and in direct response to national insurance, a third of businesses were cutting their operating hours. That's going to be economic growth that we are foregoing. 60% of them were cutting staff hours on the back of that. And it was, you know, taking out, if your pubs, there's lots of them now not opening for breakfast, not opening for morning coffee, going back to opening at 11 o'clock. Some of them only opening in the afternoon, or because of changing customer habits too. You know, there was a report out this week that said more and more people were eating out at 6 and 7 o'clock rather than 7, 8, 9 o'clock. So again, you can close the venue earlier. You've taken out a shift.
Yeah. And look, people are going to have to trim wherever they've got to trim to stay viable. I think one other concern, especially amongst independents, it's like the 1-day sick pay, the 0 hours that have now been, well, that was a bit funny how they sort of said you can still do it, but you can't do it. They've left some grey area there.
Yeah.
HR companies are going to absolutely love that. So yeah, it's all of this.
Yeah, well, that's the benefit of a final plug. That's the benefit of being a member of a trade association.
Yeah.
It's not just the campaigning and the stuff that we do, but we've got loads of webinars. The benefit of me going in on a monthly basis, talking to the ministers about what they want to do on 0 hours contracts in 2027, 28, is that I can help businesses plan now for what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And also tell them that, the worst isn't going to happen. So it does sound very confusing, but actually there's lots of ways around it, and there's lots of ways that we will be protecting the businesses. So be part of an association. You not only get a voice, but you don't have to pay for HR consultants.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I think, well, you have to be involved some way. And I think, like you say, get involved and, just do what you got to do. But I do think, like you say, people are just feeling the pressure, they're feeling the heat. And one thing I always say as well, and I'm probably a bit hard on people, but I say, you know what, we chose to be self-employed, so it is going to be hard. However, on the flip side, doesn't have to be this hard, it shouldn't feel like a punishment to be self-employed. And
I've worked in hospitality 30 years. This is the toughest trading environment that I've ever experienced, and I get it. I live and breathe it. I'm out every day talking to people. I do understand the frustration, and I do understand how real this is. And I run a small business too. My team is just 24. If we have a hit with membership, we also have to cut our cloth. I also can't do various things because of the NIC. We also face the prospect of job losses. So, it is real, and I do get it. We're not in an ivory tower.
Yeah, it's a shame the government don't sort of think, you know what, we'll tax the employee less. Let's let them have a bit of money to spend and stimulate the economy, because that's never really an argument that comes up. I know we talk about lowering VAT and such, but actually, if there was more take-home pay, like you mentioned earlier, I can't remember what the figure is for NIC and PAYE from the employee. I should know this because I've got staff, but I don't hold that information with me all the time. But imagine it was a couple of percent less. And someone had another 50 quid a week to spend somewhere.
Yes.
That would.
Well, you see, Rishi Sunak did do that.
He tried, didn't he? Yeah, and
he did 2 successive cuts on NICs. 2 percentage points knocked off employee NICs. The Cameron government increased the threshold above which you paid tax. So, their aspiration was to get it to 12K as a starting salary before you paid tax. I'm not sure it translated through to consumer spending because they didn't feel confident.
Okay.
But it's back to confidence in the economy. That's what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have to do. They have to set out a vision, talk up Britain, talk up the economy, and get people spending again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it seems like a bit of a quandary. So we've spoke about lots of negatives. Let's try finish with what you see as the positives moving forward.
Well, I do think things can only get better there,
You're bringing out all the songs today.
I am. I do. We've come out of COVID, and every year we think this is going to be the worst year, and then something else hits us. It can't go on like that. And the positives, look, the government has an ambition to get 50 million visitors a year to the UK, 10 million visitors more, and an ambition to reduce the cost of domestic holidays and get domestic people staying and having holidays. That will help all of us longer term. You've got positive signals around the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. If you had peace, again, that gives consumers confidence at a macroeconomic level. From a very parochial level, you would reduce the costs on some of those raw materials, fish, oil. They're still subject to sanctions. They're still subject to higher costs than they would otherwise be. And the government will start to get to grips with some of those big issues. We will see business rates reform, planning reform, apprenticeship levy reform. So there are reasons to be cheerful.
Yeah, but we have to say that with bated breath, don't we, to some degree? Because it only takes one.
We do, and there's a lot of pain to get through.
Yeah, and there is. Yeah, we've been through a lot, like you say, and there is still more. And but
equally, those reserves, the amount of savings that customers have got. If you get interest rates coming down, you get better mortgage deals, you get inflation under control. If consumers get permission to spend, then the real positive is that every single consumer sentiment tracker we've done since COVID says that 75% of them say that their top priority when they've got disposable income and money to spend is going out and socializing with family and friends in a hospitality venue.
Absolutely. Maybe, just to be fair to this government, because I'm probably negative against them, let's say, could it be that they front-loaded us with loads of, I'm going to say the word, shit? Like, have they front-loaded us? And actually, by the time we get to the end of the term, it could be that all of this is a distant memory. That's happened before, hasn't it?
It has happened before. And, you mentioned governments coming in with a big majority. You do get the shit out of the way first.
Okay.
And you do get all the pain. I just think, in my view, they pulled the wrong levers.
Okay.
But doing the painful stuff early on, yes, that's a classic thing. That's what Cameron and Osborne did. When they did austerity.
Austerity. A friend of mine recently told me that we keep talking about austerity, but was it 1% difference they did in terms of cuts or savings?
Yes.
That's not going to do a lot, is it? But it was
not
talking down. It was
things.
talking down that was worse, wasn't it? I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But, yes, they do the painful stuff first.
Yeah, okay.
So hopefully now they've laid the groundwork. Hopefully if they can get through, if we keep our fingers crossed and we can get through this next budget and we get permission to spend, then you could see some positive signs flowing through and you could see the positive sentiment towards growth.
You've got a lot more experience on this than me. You talk to these people every day. You're talking to other people that talk to them every day. So I take what you say as gospel and you're not promising anything. You're just saying like the reality is how it is. So yeah, for me, it's like something as hard as it is out there, it is also quite exciting because you do see innovation in tough times.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, so
you do, and we are a dynamic sector. We're vibrant. We are resilient, and people continually reinvent. But the one thing that we have to hold on to is that consumers want a home away from home.
Yeah.
And they want to socialize. So if we can give them that value for experience, they will come back to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to obviously independents that are listening to this, join because, get involved and give Kate a real headache internally, not externally. Yeah, because it makes more sense. Just, I think that I think independents especially probably want to feel part of something as well. So
yes, and there's a lot of support services that we provide. Not least the fact that you're not on your own, and there's somebody there who can help to solve a problem, a very practical, pragmatic problem, not just the sort of big picture political.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kate, on that note, you've hit the spot. You've done great. You always keep me on my toes every time. Like I sort of come in, my notes, I'm just scattering down them, and I'm just like, I can't keep up. And you don't prepare. You do it every day. You live and breathe it. But I just feel like I'm always scattering through my notes. And yeah, but no, well done. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to talk again.
And that's a wrap with today's episode with Kate Nicholls from UKHospitality. If you're a member of UKHospitality or follow her on social media, you'll be fully aware of her tireless work for the whole sector. And if you've listened to her on these episodes before, you know how much effort she puts into running the UKHospitality. If anything in today's episode sparked a thought, a question, or even a new idea, join the conversation in the Ceres Podcast discussion group on Facebook. We'd love to hear your take. Don't forget, the Ceres calculators are free to use and built to give you instant clarity on your pricing and profits. Head to ceres.shop/calculators and try them out today. At Ceres, we're not here just to sell you products. We're here to help you run a smarter, cleaner, more profitable business with tools, training, and a community that's always got your back. If you've got a challenge or a topic you want us to cover, drop us a message. Thanks for listening. I'm Stelios, and I'll see you next time on the next episode of the Ceres Podcast.